Et boulot noir. Encore un piège sauté, puis rien dedans. Boy, it's not easy to being a trapper. There's something pretty wise. Maybe a fox. Because if this is all I'm getting, these furs won't pay much. But I've got a trap over here. It might be a lynx or a coyote. Oh! Et vieux colon! Je peux pas croire! Boulot noir! Something's a little smarter than me that's able to eat the meat and not get caught. But you know, it makes me think of a story. The story of the lucky trapper. This lucky trapper played the fiddle. Un joueur de violon, un violonneux. A good fiddle player, and he sure knew how to play his fiddle. He would play at every dance, every wedding, every party. Needed a fiddle player, and this lucky trapper, he'd be there. The only problem is, a trapper can't spend the winter months in town. So this is how the story goes. You see, he got a fiddle for Christmas when he was a little boy, about 5 or 6 years old. And he played his fiddle well. He played his fiddle. And then when he made it up in the camp on his trap line, he kept on playing his fiddle. He was a pretty good trapper, better than me, that's for sure. But his friend John, who lived about 10 miles down the river, had come to see him for a visit and told him, he said, you know, your woodpile's not very big. They're announcing a very, very cold and tough winter. Oh, the fiddle player said, don't worry about me, I'll be fine. So John got in his canoe, and as he paddled off, he yelled out, I'll see you in the springtime. But as he paddled off, John thought, if he makes it, that's a pretty small woodpile for a long, cold winter. He'll freeze to death. Well, the winter was long and the winter was cold. And he spent, well, every morning and every night he'd go on his trap line, but he spent all day playing the fiddle, and he would burn his wood pile, and it was getting lower and lower. And on Christmas Eve, he only had a few pieces left to burn, and something happened that's hard to believe. That's where his fiddle saved his life. Well, I'm not a fiddle player really, but the fiddle player, the trapper in my story, boy, he sure knew how to play the fiddle. He would get people dancing, but he was all alone in his camp on his trap line. So Christmas Eve, well, he started to play the fiddle, and he played all kinds of Christmas tunes. But that night, when he went out to get some wood to put in the stove, he had 2 pieces left. Put him in the stove, and he realized then that he wouldn't have a lot of wood to keep the fire going all night. And it was cold, -40. And then the wind came up, and it was a terrible storm. The wind was coming right through the logs in his camp. He put his coat on, and he put every piece of clothing he had, layers, and it was cold. It was almost as cold inside as outside because he was running out of firewood. He thought to himself, is it possible that he's going to freeze to death? He wouldn't have time that night for sure in the dark to make firewood. So he kept on playing his fiddle, and when there was only embers in the stove, he started taking the floorboards off and burning the floorboards. Well, he had burned practically every piece of wood. He had a little stool, he burned his stool. He burned his table. He burned every piece of wood in the camp. And it was almost midnight when he realized the last piece of wood in the camp was his fiddle. He couldn't believe that he would have to burn his fiddle, but he knew that he would freeze to death. He'd have to burn every piece of wood he had. So he went around the camp just one last time to see, and he found a little log. A nice little round log, nice and dry, tamarack I think it was. And he just set that little log on the embers, and thinking that he would have to burn his fiddle, he decided to play his best tune, his best song. So he played and played, and it had been at least an hour, and that log hadn't even burnt at all, which was sitting on the embers, and the flames were slowly dancing to his fiddle tune. Well, he played his fiddle all night, and that log never burned, but his cabin got to be nice and toasty, nice and warm. The magical violin, I guess. It was Christmas Eve, and you know, there's a lot of miracles that happen on Christmas Eve. So that night, his fiddle saved his life. And the next day was a beautiful day. The sun was out, and he made himself some firewood. He had enough firewood made for a couple of days, and he worked all winter on his trap line, but also making firewood. He had learned his lesson. Now that's the story of the trapper, the fiddle player, the magical fiddle that saved his life. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you had fun like me. À la prochaine!